O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable and pleasing to you, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Welcome to Lent. Now, some of us have grown up with traditions that Lent is a very somber and boring time with not much fun going on. We're trying to make Lent a little bit more fun this year, as long as I don't lose my microphone. Lent is a long tradition in the Christian church. It goes back to when you're reading in the Gospels about how Jesus was baptized, and then he went off to the wilderness for 40 days and was tempted by Satan. Now, I don't know about you, but I know there have definitely been wilderness times in my life when I have been tempted or when things just didn't seem to be going well. So there are definitely times when I have identified with Jesus' experience of being in a wilderness, being separated, being isolated, and not having a lot of great things going on. In the early days of the early church, this 40 days of wilderness time from Jesus' life became the inspiration for the season of Lent. And this is a time when the church was preparing new believers. The church tradition was to hold baptisms on Easter weekend, usually on Holy Saturday. When I was in college, I had a roommate who had not grown up in the church, but during her college years, she came to know Jesus and she wanted to commit her life to Jesus. So during Lent, she went through a time of preparation with a local pastor, and she was baptized on Easter Eve at a special 2-hour Easter Vigil service on Saturday night at church. It was a beautiful time, both for her, but also for the many Christians through the years who have been baptized so that on Easter Sunday they could be standing with the body of believers celebrating the great resurrection. Even for those who have been Christians and believers for a long time, Lent comes every year. And every year, it is a new opportunity for us to do a little spring cleaning, to renew our own relationship with God, to maybe clear out some of the clutter in our life, and make sure that all is well with our souls. This year, as the worship committee was getting together and dreaming about Lent and how we continue to grow as disciples of Jesus in this congregation, we were inspired by our local gyms. And lots of gyms have special 6-week challenges and workouts to lure people in. To invite people to join their gyms and to become part of their gym community and to get their gym memberships. Now, I do have to say, I have always been a little suspicious that gyms here in the United States really have a business model of invite people in, but then maybe never see them again as long as they just keep paying their dues. It always seems like some of them, as long as the dues keep coming in, they don't really care a lot about whether you actually make any progress in your physical fitness. But there are other gyms, like this one, has some really great workout plans to get you inspired and excited and to really launch a new phase of your physical life. Get you stronger, get you more active, get you more flexible. So when I think about a gym, there is the invitation phase, seeing that ad on Facebook or on the TV. There is a sign-up period where you commit to the gym. You start strong, those first week to 10 days, you're going, you're at every class, you're feeling good, maybe you're a little sore. And then there's that moment where you either drop away or you get in the groove. We hope we all get in the groove. And then there's that beautiful moment when we've actually learned enough that we are ready now to invite the next person, to support the next person, maybe even to train the next person. Gyms like to offer a full body plan, so we're thinking about a full spirit plan here. And our spirit plan, our 6-week challenge during Lent this year, is based off of the membership vows of the United Methodist Church. In those vows, we promise to support our local church and the United Methodist Church with our prayers, our presence, our witness, our gifts, and our service. So our exercise plan is based on these 5 areas of discipleship, which are all things that Jesus modeled for us as we read through the book of Mark. And Mark will be the gospel that we will focus on this year during Lent. So pick up a spiritual exercise sheet and put your own name on the poster board. I do have another poster board. Last I saw, we were starting to get a lot of names on there. We can start a second board. And like I said, there may be prizes involved for your gold stars. Now, all of this sounds like fun, but there's a few people that are like, is this really biblical? Are you just gamifying church? Trying to make this feel like a video game with all the badges that you can earn for different levels of accomplishments. So we started reading from Mark today, and Mark chapter 1, Jesus says, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a terrible fisher person. I have gone fishing. I catch absolutely nothing. I went on a fishing trip with my family once to one of the lakes up by Rhinelander. We were surrounded by other boats pulling all sorts of fish out of the lake. My entire family of 5, over an entire week, were not able to catch a single fish. Now, when I was starting my process to become a pastor, I had to go to what was called an inquiring candidates retreat. A weekend retreat of spiritual discernment and story sharing as we tried to determine if God was really calling each of us to become pastors. And I met a guy there, a businessman from down in the Oconomowoc area. And each of us had to share our personal call story of how we knew that God wanted us to become a pastor at this point in our life. And this guy, hands down, had the best call story of the whole group. He was a businessman. His wife came from a family of fishermen from up north, and they loved muskie fishing. Now, I do believe that Shirley Coleman is also a very fine muskie fisher person here. When I first met her, when I came here a year ago, I got a great picture of me with her and all of her muskie trophies.
That's like your grandma.
That's right. She is very good at catching muskies. This businessman is not. Every summer he had to go up to the family cabin up north. Every summer they went fishing. Every summer he caught nothing. Every summer his father-in-law gave him a little side eye like, seriously, dude, what is wrong with you that you can't fish and catch anything? How could you marry my daughter and be so incompetent at fishing? So this guy, successful businessman, he felt a little inadequate every year when he got together with his father-in-law. Well, the summer before this retreat, he was really struggling, feeling that God was calling him to become a pastor. And his wife is like, come on, dude, get over it. Like, either do it or don't do it, but stop this dithering. And he's like, well, I just can't be sure. Now, a couple weeks we talked about Gideon. And God was calling Gideon to do something, and Gideon wasn't really sure. So Gideon decides to test God, and he put out a lamb skin, a sheepskin. He says, God, if you really want me to do this, make the ground wet and the sheepskin dry, and I'll believe in you. And God did it. Well, this businessman decided to go the Gideon route. He's like, okay, my dear wife, if God allows me to catch a muskie, I will become a pastor. And the wife is like, are you serious? He's like, yep, if I can catch a muskie, that would be a miracle, and clearly that would mean God wants me to be a pastor. The wife's like, okay, this is between you and God, whatevs. So they go up, and the father-in-law is really shocked because the son-in-law is like, okay, when are we going? I gotta go catch my muskie. And the father was like, yeah, that's not going to happen, dude. It's been 20 years. You've never caught anything. You are not catching a muskie today. He's like, I've got a thing going with God. They went out, and sure enough, he caught his muskie, and he became a pastor. But I not one of those. I don't go out and I don't catch fish. So when Jesus says, come, follow me, I'll make you a fisher of people, I'm kind of like, really? This weekend, I was a spiritual director for a group of men on a retreat. And one of them said something that really struck me. He said, you know what? Jesus said, come follow me and I will make you fishers of men, to a group of fishermen. Jesus doesn't say that to every one of us. If you're a farmer, he's going to say, hey, come follow me. I have got a farming plan that's going to blow you away. If you're an accountant, come follow me. I will make the numbers line up right every time. Whatever we are doing, are called to do, whatever our gifts are, that's where Jesus is inviting us to grow from. It's not drop everything and go do something that you have absolutely no skill and ability or desire to get involved with. If the future of the church was based on me going out and fishing, we are really in trouble. But that's not what Jesus is getting at. Jesus is saying, come follow me, and I'm going to help you grow from where you are to become more like me and to become a blessing to the world. So our second reading today talks about Levi, who also has another name, Matthew, and some people believe he's the one who eventually wrote the Gospel of Matthew. But Levi is collecting taxes. Now, I always find it interesting when I read this section, and Jesus goes and he eats with Levi, and people are like, what are you doing eating with sinners and tax collectors? As if tax collectors are some special category of humans, separate from everyone else. But back in that day and age, they really were set apart. People saw them as completely different. They were seen as corrupt agents of the oppressing empire. They were Jewish people who threw their neighbors under the bus, the Roman chariot. The Romans needed local people to collect the taxes because Romans couldn't come in and ask for taxes. No one would pay any taxes to them. So they knew in all of the different places they'd conquered, you got to get a local person to collect the taxes. But Rome just said, this is how much you need to send in. If you collect a little extra on the side, that's fine by us. So tax collectors were rich because they were cheating their neighbors as they were collecting taxes for Rome. I don't think they won the Good Neighbor Award. And so they were in their own special category. Jesus comes up to Levi. Levi is doing his business as a tax collector. Jesus is like, come follow me. And Levi left. Levi's like, yep, sign me up. The tax collectors that changed and started following Jesus changed their lives. We read about Zacchaeus, who paid back with interest his neighbors the money that he had stolen from them. Levi, Matthew, eventually ended up not only learning about Jesus, learning enough that he could teach others about Jesus, but he gave his own life as a witness to Jesus in the world. Our final song, Bartimaeus, he's blind, but he'd heard about Jesus, and he hears that Jesus is coming by, and he starts yelling. He starts yelling. Now, when we walk by people sitting on the side of the road yelling, we tend to try to avoid them. I actually had a friend in my 20s when we were living out east in Washington, D.C. She said that if she was sitting someplace waiting for a bus and some guy came up and seemed menacing, she would start yelling and she'd start slapping herself. And usually that guy would just then wander around and leave her alone because it's like, yeah, this is some crazy lady. I'm not going anywhere near her. But that wasn't what Jesus did. This guy is sitting by the side of the road yelling, and Jesus heals him. And this guy gets up and follows Jesus. All of these stories are people who did not intend to follow Jesus. They didn't intend to be religious. They didn't intend for this to be part of their life. They were living the life that they were brought up to live, that they expected to live. Jesus invited them, and they said yes, and they stopped what they were doing. And as we read these stories It is clear throughout all the Gospels that this invitation is something that Jesus offers every one of us. No matter how young we are, how old we are, what we're doing, where we've been, what we've done, every one of us is getting a beautiful invitation from Jesus to fit Jesus into our lives and do something differently. So, for us, in our lives today, the first thing we start thinking is, am I ready to do this? What do I need to get ready to do this? Now, if you're going to sign up for a gym, we make sure we have the right clothes to go. And a lot of gyms are like, no outside shoes. We got to keep everything clean. So you got to have an extra pair of shoes that you haven't worn outside. There's things we try to get ready when we're deciding to join a gym. But what does it mean to be ready spiritually? These guys we just read about followed Jesus seemingly on the spur of the moment. They didn't have time to get ready, but somehow God had been working in their lives, preparing them that the moment Jesus showed up, they were ready to say yes. They were ready to receive the invitation. They were ready to respond to the invitation. These guys all figured out a way to fit Jesus into their lives. Now, as we read through the Gospel of Mark, and I think you get 5 stars if you read the entire Gospel of Mark, just saying, you will see that there's a variety of responses. There are some people who show up for a day, like the people who ended up getting the loaves and fishes for lunch. 5,000 people who show up for a day. There weren't 5,000 people following Jesus every single day for 3 years. But there were people who showed up. The woman at the well in Samaria. She showed up one day, had one conversation with Jesus, told all of her friends and relatives, and they started the first church in Samaria right then and there. But they didn't leave then. They didn't go and follow. We never hear of the woman from the well from Samaria ever again. But there are still Christian churches in Samaria. Some of us will be called to radically change our life, like the fishermen, to drop everything, to really focus, and then go out and do something else. But some people are invited, come learn something, go back to your regularly scheduled life, and start applying this every hour of every day. How can you show love? How can you share kindness? Those gifts that the kids told us that Jesus gives us. How can we do that in our daily actions, in our daily lives? As I was reading Mark, the parable of the soils from chapter 4 really spoke to my soul this year. I've heard this story a number of times, but you know, that's the beauty of reading the Bible, is that you can read it over and over, and it says something different to you each time. And this story, as I read it this year, seemed like a serious challenge. Listen to this, it says, a farmer went out to scatter seed. This is one of those stories that Jesus is telling his followers as a teaching device. Jesus said, as the farmer was scattering seed, some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where the soil was shallow. They sprouted immediately because the soil wasn't deep. When the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Other seed fell among thorny plants. The thorny plants grew and choked the seeds, and they produced nothing. Other seed fell into good soil and bore fruit. Upon growing and increasing, the seed produced, in one case, a yield of 30 to 1, in another case, a yield of 60 to 1, and in another case, a yield of 100 to 1. There were 2 things that really struck me as I was going through this year. One, I've just always wanted to be the good soil. I would hear this story, I'm like, oh God, I'm not the path. I'm not the rocky soil. I'm not the thorny soil. I am the good soil. I want to be the good soil. But as I was thinking about these different places where the seeds fall down, I suddenly realized there have been times when I have been the stony soil. There have been times when I get super excited and I really get going full bore, grow really fast because I'm super excited about starting something. But I haven't taken the time to prepare. I didn't take the time to grow roots, to build a network, to get all the resources in place. And I usually fail in a blaze of glory very quickly. And then I was thinking about the thorny ground. And I never wanted to be the thorny ground, but I started thinking, what is the thorny ground? And it occurred to me that the thorny ground is the distractions in my life. That I'm growing some roots, and I'm growing a plant. I'm doing better than when I was the blaze of glory, stony soil. I'm putting some things together, but I haven't cleared the space. I have distractions that are keeping me from really doing what God's calling me to do. I have been the thorny soil. So as I read this, the second thing that really struck me was that God has some really high-level expectations here. 30 to 1, 60 to 1, 100 to 1 yields. I thought it was bad when I read the parable of the talents, and I was supposed to be yielding double what God had invested in me. And now God's looking at 100 to 1. First of all, that's not something I can do on my own. I think we got to get together if we're going to have 100 to 1 yield on anything. But what would that even look like? To be so rooted, to grow such a strong root system, that I have such a strong faith life that I can yield 100 to 1 for God's kingdom. So our last question here is, what is our story here? Where do we feel inadequate? Where are we distracted? Where do we get going too fast without preparing? Where are we lacking the good soil? We are going to be doing 5 spiritual exercises with the intention of building up our soil. Each one of these exercises helps us in one way to be stronger in our walk with Jesus, to have the strength to keep up with Jesus. Now, one of the final questions I have is, does it really matter if I get stronger spiritually? I mean, yeah, it sounds like a nice thing, just like going to the gym and getting stronger physically sounds like a nice thing. But what does it really matter if I put in the time this Lent to get stronger in my soul? So I've been at this retreat for the last couple days with a group of men from around the state. And we were talking about our faith lives. And one guy was talking about how busy he was. He was a farmer. He had every excuse in the book for not engaging in his spiritual life. For years he had done this, and he had this story about his wife asking him to do something church-related, and he's like, I'm too busy. I got this farm work to do. It's not going to do itself. And his wife actually broke down in tears that he couldn't find time to be with her and God. Another guy shared his story of being too addicted to alcohol and gambling. My guess is each one of us have our own reasons for being the stony soil, the path, or the thorny soil. We have our own reasons why we don't do more spiritual exercises, why we don't build up our spiritual strength. But in the course of the weekend, as we shared our faith stories, one guy shared how becoming more active at church, finding time for God and church activities in his life, transformed his relationship with his wife. He had been abusive to his wife, but because of growing spiritually, he came to love his wife in new ways. And they now have a beautiful, vibrant, healthy marriage. One guy, the busy guy, now does mission trips regularly in his own community, has even traveled around the world. And he has such a rich, vibrant life. He is so happy. He's like, I had no idea. I thought I was doing all this good stuff, but it was nothing compared to what I feel now when I give time to Jesus. One guy was worried about dying. And by spending time building up his spiritual strength, he now has comfort that everything's going to be okay whenever he gets to that moment. One guy, maybe less dramatic, but he simply decided to make God more of a priority in his life. He has less stress in his life. Like, nothing else changed in his life. He's still doing all the stuff he was doing before, but the stress is gone. He is physically healthier. His relationships are healthier because he's not as stressed. He made God a priority. So growing spiritually is worth it. I invite you to accept the invitation that Jesus is giving you. I invite you to look for a day-by-day improvement in your spirit as you learn and try new ways to connect to God and community. But through this all, it's not like going to the gym and lifting these weights, which I can go and I can do, and I either can lift it or I can't lift it. But ultimately, to grow our spirits, it comes down to accepting the strength of the Holy Spirit. And when the Holy Spirit is working with us, we can yield 100 to 1 for God's kingdom.